February 1920. A 9-year-old girl lies dying alone in a Lisbon hospital. They have torn out 2 of her ribs without anesthesia. Her mother is hundreds of miles away. But she smiles, because the Lady of Light has promised that she will come for her soon. This is the story of Jacinta Marto, the youngest non-martyr saint in history. Europe, 1917. The continent bleeds out in the trenches of the Somme and Verdun. Millions of young men die in the mud while empires crumble. In Portugal, the situation is no better. Since 1910, the anti-clerical republic has shuttered convents, expelled religious orders, and banned public processions. The church lives cornered. But in the Cova da Iria, where holm oaks shade flocks of sheep and only the wind breaks the silence, another world exists. Villages of stone and whitewash, where families pray the rosary each night by the fire. Aljustrel is one of them, a handful of humble houses adjoining Fatima, inhabited by peasants who can barely read but know by heart the prayers of their grandparents. Here live the Martos and the Dos Santos, families bound by blood and by a faith inherited through generations. And here, in this forgotten corner of the world, heaven is about to break through with an urgent message. 3 shepherd children will be chosen to receive it, and the youngest among them will write with her life one of the most moving pages in the history of the Church. Jacinta de Jesus Marto comes into the world on March 11, 1910, in a whitewashed stone house in Aljustrel. She is the 7th and last child of Manuel Pedro Marto and Olimpia de Jesus, a couple of farmers who live off the land and their livestock. Her father is a man of few words but deep faith, respected in the village for his honesty. Her mother runs the household with authority and tenderness, combining hard work with constant prayer. In this large and devout family, Jacinta grows up as the baby of the family, the little girl with big eyes and an easy laugh who wins everyone over with her natural charm. From a very young age, Jacinta reveals a contradictory temperament that will puzzle those who know her. On one hand, she is whimsical, stubborn, fond of ornaments and folk dances. She loves to braid wildflowers into her dark hair and gaze at her reflection in the water. When she loses at children's games, she cries with a sorrow that seems excessive. But that same sensitivity also makes her weep at the suffering of others. An injured lamb, a hungry beggar, any creature in pain awakens in her a deep and genuine compassion. She is vain and tender, stubborn and generous, a normal child with all the imperfections of her age. Her constant companions are her brother Francisco, 1 year older than her, and her cousin Lucia dos Santos, who is 4 years their senior. The 3 form an inseparable trio when they go out to shepherd their family's sheep through the fields surrounding Aljustrel, the Cova da Iria, the Cabeço, Valinhos. They build little stone houses, make their voices echo across the hills, invent games with rosary beads. Because yes, they pray the rosary every day, though sometimes they shorten it out of laziness, saying only the first words of each prayer. Lucia is the natural leader of the group, Francisco the contemplative dreamer, and Jacinta the little princess who always gets her way. Nothing about these 3 little shepherds suggests an extraordinary destiny. But in the spring of 1916, when Jacinta is barely 6 years old, something inexplicable begins to happen. On 3 separate occasions, a radiant young man appears to them while they tend the flock. He introduces himself as the Angel of Peace, the Angel of Portugal. He teaches them prayers of adoration and reparation they have never heard before. He gives them communion in a mystical way, with a host suspended in the air and a chalice from which blood flows. He speaks to them of sacrifices they must offer for sinners. Jacinta, the youngest, watches everything with her enormous eyes, not fully understanding, but sensing that something definitive is changing in her soul. The angel has planted a seed. Soon, very soon, that seed will blossom in a way that will forever transform this willful little girl into a giant of the spirit. Sunday, May 13th, 1917, dawned bright over the Cova da Iria. The three little shepherds had attended Mass at the parish church of Fatima and prayed the rosary with their families before heading out with the flock toward the Cova da Iria, a natural hollow surrounded by holm oaks and olive trees where the grass grew thick for the sheep. It was a day like any other, or so it seemed. Near noon, while the children played at building a stone wall, two sudden flashes tore through the blue sky like silent lightning. Frightened, they thought a storm was approaching and began gathering the animals to head home. But then, above a small holm oak that barely reached their waists, they saw something that would change their lives forever. A lady dressed entirely in white, brighter than the noonday sun, with a rosary of luminous beads between her joined hands. The radiance emanating from her did not hurt their eyes, but filled them with an inexplicable peace. Jacinta, barely 7 years old, gazed at the apparition unable to move, her heart pounding hard against her ribs. The lady spoke with a voice the children would later describe as crystalline music. She asked them not to be afraid, that she came from heaven, that they should return to that same place on the 13th day of each month for 6 consecutive months. And then she posed the question that would seal Jacinta's destiny: whether they were willing to offer themselves to God to bear all the sufferings He wished to send them, in reparation for the sins by which He is offended and as a plea for the conversion of sinners. Lucia, as the eldest, answered for all three with a resounding yes. But it was Jacinta who felt those words burn themselves into her soul. She had just made a promise whose scope she could not comprehend, but which she would fulfill with heroic faithfulness until her final breath. The apparitions continued month after month. June brought new revelations about the Immaculate Heart of Mary. August was delayed because the Masonic administrator of the council had kidnapped them. September drew thousands of curious onlookers. But it was July that marked Jacinta indelibly, the month that transformed her from a child into a victim of love. On July 13, 1917, the lady showed the three little shepherds a vision of hell. For an instant that seemed eternal, they beheld a sea of fire where demons and human souls writhed amid shrieks of despair and blasphemy. Lucia screamed in terror. Francisco, who could not hear the lady but saw everything, turned pale as death. But it was Jacinta, the youngest, who was most deeply wounded by that horrifying vision. From that day forward, the little girl who loved to dance and adorn her hair with flowers ceased to exist. In her place emerged a creature obsessed with a single thought: the souls being lost for eternity. She repeated ceaselessly, her eyes brimming with tears, "Hell, hell! How sorry I feel for the souls that go to hell. There are people there, alive, burning like wood in the fire." She no longer cared for children's games or the small vanities of before. Her only desire was to do something, anything, to snatch souls from that abyss of fire. The lady had also revealed to them a secret in 3 parts: future wars, the consecration of Russia, the suffering of a pope dressed in white. But for Jacinta, everything was eclipsed by that terrible image of hell and by the Virgin's words that echoed in her ears day and night. Sacrifice yourselves for sinners, and say often, especially when you make some sacrifice, "O Jesus, it is for love of you, for the conversion of sinners, and in reparation for the sins committed against the Immaculate Heart of Mary." Jacinta had found her mission, and she would embrace it with an intensity that would astonish everyone who knew her. The sacrifices Jacinta imposed upon herself after the vision of hell defied all human logic. This 7-year-old girl, who just months before had cried over losing games, began to seek suffering with the fervor of the great mystics. She systematically gave up her afternoon snack of bread and olives to give it to poorer children in the village, or even to the sheep in the flock. On the scorching days of the Portuguese summer, When the sun over the Cova da Iria turned the fields into an oven, Jacinta refused to drink water for endless hours. Lucia recounts that her little cousin would look at the well with cracked lips and say, "No, I don't want to drink. I want to suffer for sinners." Together with Francisco and Lucia, she began wearing a rough cord tied around her waist, under her clothes, which tore at their skin with every movement. The Virgin had to ask them to wear it only during the day because they had been sleeping with it on. But Jacinta went further. When she found nettles in the field, she would deliberately strike her legs with them until her skin was covered in burning welts. To anyone who asked why she hurt herself, she always responded with the same phrase learned from the lady, "It is for the conversion of sinners." But the physical sacrifices, however painful they were, proved minor compared to the trials the world had in store for them. The parish priest of Fatima, Father Manuel Marquez Ferreira, received news of the apparitions with deep distrust. He feared it was all a diabolical hoax or a childish fantasy that would ridicule the church, already so persecuted in Portugal. He interrogated the children harshly, searching for contradictions in their accounts, warning them of the consequences of lying about sacred matters. But the true persecution came from civil authorities. Artur de Oliveira Santos, the administrator of the Orem district, was a convinced Mason and furious anti-clerical who saw in the Fatima apparitions a threat to the Republican project of dechristianizing Portugal. On August 13, 1917, the day of the fourth apparition, he showed up in Aljustrel under the pretext of taking the children to the Cova in his carriage. Instead, he kidnapped them and locked them in the village jail alongside common prisoners, thieves, and drunkards who stared in amazement at those three frightened little ones. For 3 days, the administrator subjected the little shepherds to separate interrogations, employing every intimidation tactic he knew. He told them he had a cauldron of boiling oil ready, where he would fry them alive if they didn't confess that the apparitions were lies. He interrogated Jacinta, the youngest, alone, expecting her fragility would make her give in. The 7-year-old girl trembled with fear in that cold room, but when Santos demanded she reveal the secret the lady had entrusted to them, Jacinta responded with a firmness that bewildered the official. "I cannot tell. The lady does not want me to." When he threatened to kill her, she replied without hesitation, "If you kill us, we will go to heaven." The administrator, defeated by the resistance of illiterate children, had to release them without having achieved anything. Jacinta returned to Aljustrel without a single complaint, but that experience had tempered her soul as steel is tempered in fire. She was no longer a child playing at being a saint. She was a martyr in the making. The fame of the apparitions attracted ever larger crowds to Aljustrel, turning the little shepherd's daily life into a Calvary of another kind. Pilgrims from all over Portugal invaded the village, seeking to see the seers, touch them, ask them for favors, tear relics from their clothing. Skeptical journalists hounded them with trick questions. Faithless onlookers mocked them to their faces. Lucia's family, convinced their daughter was lying and ashamed of the scandal, treated her with a harshness that bordered on cruelty. Only Manuel Pedro Marto and his wife Olympia believed their children from the very first moment, protecting them with a simple but unshakable faith. Jacinta endured all of this with a serenity beyond her years. She had understood something many adults never come to grasp, that suffering accepted out of love holds infinite value before God. The lady had promised she would come to take her soon to bring her to heaven, and that promise was her comfort and her strength. While other children her age thought about games and sweets, Jacinta Marto thought about the souls in hell and how to save them with each small sacrifice of her daily life. The seed the angel had planted in 1916 was bearing fruit that would astonish the world. The dawn of October 13th, 1917, brought with it a persistent rain that soaked the Cova da Iria and the 70,000 people who had gathered there since the night before. Barefoot peasants in their Sunday best, Lisbon bourgeoisie with black umbrellas, journalists sent by anti-clerical newspapers to document the failure of superstition, priests who had traveled from afar, risking ecclesiastical censure. All of them sank into the mud while waiting for something they themselves could not define. The lady had promised a miracle so that all would believe, and Jacinta, soaked to the bone alongside her cousins, knew that promise would be fulfilled. When the clock struck solar noon, Lucia cried out for them to look at the sun. What happened next was witnessed by believers and atheists alike, and would be recorded in the archives of history as one of the most documented phenomena of the 20th century. The sun began to spin upon itself like a wheel of fire, casting beams of light in every color that painted the faces of the crowd red, yellow, green, blue. Then it seemed to break free from the firmament and plunge toward the earth in a zigzagging fall that tore screams of terror from the multitude. Thousands of people fell to their knees in the mud, convinced that the end of the world had come. But as suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon ceased, and the sun returned to its usual place in the sky. And then everyone noticed something impossible. Their clothes, soaked just minutes before, were completely dry. The newspaper O Século, bastion of Portuguese anti-clericalism, published the event on the front page with testimonies from its own reporters. Fatima had ceased to be a village rumor and had become a fact the world could not ignore. But while the crowd celebrated the miracle, Jacinta received from the lady a revelation she kept in her heart, like a double-edged sword. The Virgin confirmed what she had already hinted at in previous apparitions, that she would come soon to take her to heaven, but first she would have to pass through 2 hospitals, not to be cured, but to suffer more for the love of God and for the conversion of sinners. The 7-year-old girl heard this death sentence with a peace that puzzled Lucia when she told her afterward. For Jacinta, going to heaven was the supreme reward, and if the price was more suffering, she was willing to pay it with joy. What she did not know was how high that price would be, nor how alone she would be when the time came to pay it. The year 1918 brought with it the Spanish flu pandemic that spread across Europe like an angel of death, reaping millions of lives in just a few months. Portugal was no exception, and neither was the village of Aljustrel. In October of that year, both Francisco and Jacinta fell gravely ill. Francisco, the contemplative one, who preferred to console the hidden Jesus rather than save souls from hell, was the first to depart. He died on April 4th, 1919, serene and smiling, after receiving his first and last communion. His final words were to ask forgiveness for his sins and to say goodbye to Jacinta with the promise of waiting for her in heaven. Jacinta survived the initial flu, but the illness left devastating effects on her small body. She developed purulent pleurisy that caused extremely high fevers and constant pain in her chest. In August 1919, she was transferred to the hospital in Urem, where she spent 2 months in agony in a common ward, surrounded by adult patients and far from her mother. The treatment was primitive and painful. They drained the pus from her pleura, with procedures that left her exhausted and tearful. But every time a nurse asked if she was suffering greatly, Jacinta responded with the phrase that had become her litany. "Yes, but I offer it for the conversion of sinners and for the Holy Father." Because the lady had also shown her visions of the future, a pope dressed in white who suffered persecution, who was attacked by soldiers, who fell wounded. Jacinta did not understand everything she saw, but she knew that Pope needed her prayers and her sacrifices. Decades later, when John Paul II was shot in St. Peter's Square on May 13, 1981, many would remember the prophetic words of that Portuguese girl who had offered her life for him before he was even born. In January 1920, the doctors decided that Jacinta needed an operation that could only be performed in Lisbon. They transferred her to the Hospital de Dona Estefania, hundreds of kilometers from Aljustrel, separating her definitively from her mother. Olimpia de Jesus, devastated, had no means to accompany her to the capital. Jacinta departed alone, having just turned 9 years old, toward a strange city where she knew no one. She was taken in by a pious woman named Maria da Purificação Godinho, in whose home she stayed until she was admitted to the hospital for the operation. During those weeks, Jacinta had new visions of the Virgin, who consoled her and revealed precise details about her imminent death. She knew she would die alone, without receiving the sacraments, but she accepted even that deprivation as one more sacrifice. On February 10th, the surgeons operated on her without general anesthesia because her heart was too weakened to withstand it. They administered only local chloroform while they removed 2 of her ribs to drain the purulent abscess that was killing her. The pain was excruciating, but Jacinta did not scream. She clenched her teeth and offered every stab of pain for the souls that fell into hell like snowflakes. The wound was left open, constantly draining, and the doctors knew there was no hope. All that remained was to wait for the end that Jacinta herself had announced with an exact date. The night of February 20th, 1920, fell over Lisbon with a damp cold that seeped through the windows of Dona Estefania Hospital. In a room on the 2nd floor, Jacinta Marto lay motionless, the open wound on her side oozing onto the white sheets. She was 9 years, 10 months, and 9 days old. 4 days earlier, the Virgin had appeared to her for the last time to tell her the exact hour of her departure. Jacinta shared this with the nurse Aurora with the naturalness of someone announcing a long-awaited appointment. She would die on Friday at 10:30 at night. The nurse, deeply moved, called the hospital chaplain to administer the last sacraments, but the priest, busy with other patients, promised to return the next day. He didn't make it in time. At 10 o'clock on the night of February 20th, Jacinta asked them to call the chaplain because she felt the moment was approaching. Half an hour later, when the nurse returned to the room, she found the child with her eyes closed and an expression of absolute peace on her face. She had died alone, without the communion she so longed for, without the embrace of her mother who was hundreds of kilometers away, fulfilling to the very end her calling as a victim soul for sinners. Jacinta's final sacrifice was to die deprived of all human and sacramental comfort, seemingly abandoned yet sustained by the invisible presence of that lady who had promised to come for her. The body of the little visionary was first transferred to Urem, where it remained buried for 15 years in the family vault of the Baron of Alvaiazere, who had paid for her stay in Lisbon. On September 12, 1935, when the exhumation was carried out to transfer her remains to Fatima, those present were astonished. Jacinta's face remained incorrupt, her features perfectly recognizable, as if she were sleeping a peaceful sleep. Her hands, crossed over her chest, retained the flexibility of life. Only her body had undergone natural decomposition beneath her garments. This phenomenon, which the Church does not automatically consider miraculous, but which frequently accompanies the saints, was interpreted by many as a sign from heaven regarding this child who had given everything for love. Her remains were placed in the Fatima cemetery and later transferred to the Basilica of Our Lady of the Rosary, where they rest today alongside those of her brother Francisco and her cousin Lucia, the 3 little shepherds reunited forever in the place where heaven touched the earth. The beatification process for Jacinta and Francisco officially began in 1949, but it advanced with the characteristic slowness of the Church when examining causes for sainthood. The main obstacle was theological. Until then, the Church had never beatified children who were not martyrs, based on the argument that minors could not exercise heroic virtues with full deliberation. The case of the Fatima shepherd children forced theologians to reconsider this position. The investigations revealed that Jacinta, despite her young age, had practiced faith, hope, and charity to a heroic degree, with a constancy and depth that would put many adults to shame. Her understanding of the mystery of redemptive suffering, her total surrender to God's will, her burning compassion for sinners, All of this demonstrated a spiritual maturity that transcended the limits of age. On May 13, 2000, in a historic ceremony held at Fatima before more than 1 million pilgrims, Pope John Paul II proclaimed Francisco and Jacinta Marto blessed. He was the same pope who had been shot exactly 19 years earlier, the same pontiff whose suffering Jacinta had seen in her childhood visions and for whom she had offered so many of her pains. The bullet that nearly cost John Paul II his life is now set in the crown of Our Lady of Fatima, a silent testimony to that mysterious connection between a Portuguese girl from the beginning of the century and a Polish pope from its end. On May 13, 2017, the centenary of the first apparition, Pope Francis canonized the two Marto siblings in a ceremony that gathered pilgrims from around the world. Francisco and Jacinta thus became the youngest non-martyr saints in the entire history of the Catholic Church, a title that underscores the extraordinary depth of their response to divine grace. But beyond the official honors, Jacinta's true legacy lives on in every heart that takes her message seriously. The words the Virgin entrusted to those 3 illiterate children from the Cova da Iria continue to resonate with urgency a century later. Prayer, penance, reparation for sins, conversion. Jacinta understood that these were not empty words, but a program for life, and she embraced it with all its consequences. Her tomb in the Basilica of Fatima receives millions of visitors each year, but her true sanctuary is not made of marble and gold. It exists in every silent sacrifice offered out of love, in every rosary prayed for those who do not pray, in every pain accepted as a ransom for souls who are lost. Saint Jacinta Marto, the child who saw hell and decided to empty it with her love, continues to intercede from heaven for this world that so desperately needs to learn what she learned, that there is no true love without sacrifice, and that every soul is worth the blood of Christ. The silence of the Lisbon hospital still holds the echo of a lesson that the modern world desperately needs to hear. In an age obsessed with avoiding suffering at any cost, a 9-year-old girl proved that pain embraced out of love can transform the eternal destiny of countless souls. Jacinta did not choose her cross, but she chose to carry it with a generosity that defies all human understanding. Her brief life contains a complete gospel. She teaches us that holiness has no minimum age, that the little ones can be giants before God, that every sacrifice offered in secret resonates to the farthest reaches of heaven. While the world chases after fleeting pleasures, Jacinta reminds us that there exists a deeper joy, that of spending oneself for others, of converting one's own suffering into ransom for those who walk toward the abyss without knowing it. Today, when so many souls live as if eternity did not exist, the message of Fatima retains all its urgency. Prayer and sacrifice, 2 simple words that hold the antidote to the spiritual lukewarmness of our time. May the example of this little victim of love awaken us from our lethargy and compel us to take seriously our own call to holiness. Saint Jacinta Marto, innocent victim for the conversion of sinners, pray for us.